can see them.
Okay, great. We are in technology. You gotta love it.
Yay, technology.
Okay, so the struggle is real. Teacher self-care and balance. Here's my contact information. I'll also have this at the end. I'd love to connect with people after if you have thoughts and you want to share with me. Like I said, I'm super grateful to MK for offering this. I'm grateful for all of you to be here. And I just some hopes for today. I'm hoping that this is a conversation as much as it can be given the format, that we're real, that we're supportive, that we know we're all doing the best we can and we're helping each other along the way. I've thought a lot about how in the world do we even talk about self-care at this kind of time. And so I just want to own it's hard right now. It's hard for me. I think it's hard for many of us. And that is simply a reality that we're dealing with. I come to self-care not as some kind of, I don't know, like enlightened guru who's got it all figured out. I am a total like recovering perfectionist, control freak, inclined towards anxiety kind of person. And so I come to self-care as somebody who has to think about it. And so I hope that's a place where we can connect and share as peers who are all kind of figuring this out and doing our best to get along. Oh no. Sorry folks, technical difficulties. Somehow my slides are not, I think, advancing. Are you still seeing a title slide?
Yes, I was seeing the title slide.
Okay, I've advanced 2 slides on my screen. Let me do this again. Share screen.
Okay.
Okay, and technology. Okay. Hopefully it's working better now. So participation, as Rachel said, everybody's got their video off and muted, but I'm still hoping this is a conversation. Webinars are a tough format for many of us, but I really believe we learn more when we're all talking than me trying to be the sage on the stage talking at you for 45 minutes. So please plan to engage, to reflect, to participate. I've got a couple of different mechanisms that we're going to try out to engage even at a distance. Please ask your questions, but also share ideas in the chat box. I guess video on or off, Rachel's made that call. But also if you need to step out to deal with something, a lot of us are multitasking in all sorts of crazy new ways right now. And we get it. So if you need to do what you need to, come back when you can. Okay, so resources and material. Rachel is going to send you these slides, I believe, but I also put together a research page for everybody on my website. So you have the link there. It is password protected. It's just for us. It's the super secure password, workshop.balance. And then I also put together a guided journal for us, and we'll use a couple of the questions over the course of today, but if you want that to support your practice as you go on, you've got the link there. The research page on my website has all of these handouts, so don't worry about capturing everything right now. And it also has some other resources. I keep finding cool things about self-care and emailing them to myself to add to the page. So that will be there for all of you going forward. Wait a minute. One of the slides you missed was our agenda. So welcome, check. I want to talk a little bit about some guiding ideas. I want to talk about 3 elements of self-care as I think about them. There's a lot of different ways to organize our thinking, but this is how I structure my thinking. So those 3 are amplifying positives, managing challenges, and maintaining energy. And then we'll have a few minutes for action planning and wrap up. And then I'm going to try to pause for questions as we go along, but I hope we also have a few minutes to do question and answer at the end as well. Okay. Before we go on, are there any questions about logistics or the agenda for today? I can't see the chat box, so Rachel, if you see anything urgent, would you let me know?
I will. We've posted the link to the guide in the chat box, and I've mentioned also that we will share the all of the slides with all the links after the webinar as well.
Great, thank you. Okay, guiding idea. The thing I came back to the most as I was thinking through this process was you have to do you. So I can tell you some of the things that work for me, but they may or may not be what works for you. So I think what is most helpful is to share our different stories and share the questions that can help us sort through, is this going to be the thing that helps me? Because it's all going to be different for each of us. And that process is about sort of awareness and reflection. And that's why I'm giving you the guided journal and a couple other reflection prompts. Guiding ideas. We're doing the best we can with what we've got. I just believe this as kind of true of the universe, but also we've got enough to stress about without stressing about self-care. Some of us have this particular talent for getting stressed and then getting stressed about the fact that we're stressed, which is not fun and not helpful. And so I hope if you're somebody who also does that like me, that this webinar is not 45 minutes of coming up with more things to stress about how you need to do self-care. We're doing the best we can. And then self-care, I do think, is a skill, not a talent. So it's something we can always improve on. But that process is a marathon, not a sprint. So if you're down right now, it might be that you need some new tools. It might be you need to use your tools better, but it might just be, this is a situation that none of us could really prepare for. And so a lot of us are caught off guard and we're struggling and we're kind of muddling our way through. And so it's just helpful to remember this is a marathon. Now is not forever. This too shall pass, however you phrase that. So those are ideas that are just kind of embedded in my thinking about self-care and how I want to have this conversation today. So those three elements of self-care, there's a lot of ways that we could organize our thinking about self-care, and different people do it in different ways. This is just what helps me. And so it's how I'm going to structure our conversation. Amplifying the positives, getting the most we can out of the good things that are in our life and getting as many of those things as we can. And then managing the challenges. Challenges are inevitable. We're all dealing with a lot of them right now. How do we handle that in ways that help us stay balanced? And then how do we maintain our energy so that we can show up to welcome those positives, to manage those challenges, to do all the things, to be there for all of our different roles and selves and responsibilities. And we are going to work through those three in more or less that order today. So amplifying positives. There's increasingly conversation about self-care out there. I imagine you can hashtag self-care on Instagram and find 1,000,002 pictures. There's certainly articles and podcasts and all of the different media coming at us talking about self-care. And a lot of that talk I hear, at least what I think about, is about challenges. How do we handle the hard stuff? And about our energy. How do we take care of ourselves? How do we show up? And those are really important. But I also think it's important to take a minute to think about how do we welcome and support and amplify the positive aspects of our life. And so I want to start there. Partly, I want to start there because it's easier to face any kind of challenge when we're also filled up with the positives. But also, I know it is really easy to lose sight of them. So if you have had the experience of, I don't know, getting 17 pieces of praise and 1 piece of criticism, you spend the next 3 days thinking about that piece of criticism, that's not just you. That is human wiring. It's a thing called negativity bias. And it's something that just kind of comes pre-installed from the factory settings. And it's because evolutionarily it was helpful, because once upon a time that one email that we're stressing about for 3 days was not an email. That was a saber-toothed tiger, and it was really helpful to spend the next 3 days figuring out how to avoid the saber-toothed tiger. Unfortunately, we've still got that wiring now, and it's not always helpful. But I think if we're aware, oh, humans, myself included, tend to focus on the negatives, then we can be a little bit more intentional about kind of working with that and trying to counter it with some focus on the positives. So the why, there's a parable. The internet gave me a whole bunch of sources for this, so I'm just going to say anonymous, about a traveler coming across a couple of ye olde workers and asking them what they're doing, and one of them says, I'm cutting stone, and one of them says, I'm building a wall, and one of them says something like, I'm building a cathedral to inspire awe and honor my religion. And we can guess which one of those workers was more satisfied with their work, even though they were all doing the same thing. And it turns out that this is not just a parable. Some scientists couldn't find many cathedral builders to interview, but they found some hospital maintenance staff. And so these are folks who are probably underpaid, underappreciated, overworked, who are doing kind of day-to-day cleaning work tasks in a major hospital. And they go and they ask, like, tell me about your work. What is it you do? And many of them, not unreasonably, say, oh, I sweep the floor, I empty the trash, I scrub all the things, I do this and that. Some of them say something like, I contribute to an environment where people can heal. And we can imagine, and actually we don't have to imagine, we know because these scientists checked, who is more satisfied in their work, who feels less stress, who has more resilience in that situation. And that story of my work has meaning, that doesn't change the fact that those folks deserve a union and a living wage, but it helps them to navigate through. And I hope this is not in the science, it's just my personal projection. I hope it gave them some power to lobby for the living wage because we're contributing to an environment for healing. But the point is that there's an extent to which we can impact our experience with the story that we tell about what that experience means. Am I sweeping floors or am I contributing to healing? I'm doing the same thing, but I will experience that very differently. In our work, and I'm going to talk about work a number of times today just because I think it's probably common ground that we all have, or at least many of us have. But the process is the same, the questions are the same, the thinking is the same for any of the other domains of your life where you need to be doing some intentional thought about self-care. So you could ask these questions about parenting or about your relationships, about being in community, about whatever else you're struggling with. But in our work, we can identify those positives pretty easily. So for many of us, it's about making an impact on our students, that kind of mission thing. It might also be teaching something you love and getting excited about the content. It might well be working with your colleagues and connecting with those folks. It might be learning something new or accomplishing a goal, having that sense of growth. And I just want to acknowledge that right now, you might be feeling some sadness about some of those that are generally positives, but I think it's still helpful to identify what are the positives. If I'm feeling sad about work, what about work am I feeling sad about? What am I missing so that we can think about, can I get some of that back? How can I work with that a little more intentionally? So this is my experiment in interactive webinar design. I am going to ask you to engage in a moment of shared reflection on this question. What are some of the aspects of your work that energize you? And again, if you need to think through some other aspect of your life, you do you, go for it, works for me. But I'm gonna ask Rachel to share a link in the chat that goes to a Google Doc. I ask you to click over to that link and type in some of your answers. As you're doing that, you'll probably be reading others that are popping in at the same time. If you see something that really resonates you, put an asterisk or a star next to it so we start to see those common experiences. And then we're going to take 2 minutes to do this, so it's just a quick brainstorm. I am going to press play on this little video down here, and you will hear wave sounds. One, because it's 2 minutes of waves, and so when the waves stop, you need to switch back over to Zoom. And 2, because I grew up on the coast and I find wave sounds incredibly soothing. So this is 2 minutes of self-care for me and my stress levels. I hope it helps you as well. Are there any questions about logistics or process or how that's going to work? So you're going to click over to a doc, add your comments, and then come back in 2 minutes. Okay. It's so strange that I can't hear you all, but I'm going to press the waves and hope this works.
Great. The link is in the chat box, folks, so you can click right on that link. It should be active in your chat screen. If you don't see the chat screen, what you want to do is go to the top or the bottom of your Zoom screen, and you'll see some settings, and the icon for the chat box will be one of those settings. And you can just click on chat, and you'll see the chat box.
Okay, I see some answers starting to populate.
I see a couple people having some trouble opening the link.
I would say if you have trouble, sorry, I got to mute the waves for a second. If you have trouble with the link, you could try typing it in. The link on the slides, the bit.ly link, goes to the same place. Or you could just type some answers in the chat box. And Rachel, if we can just save that chat before we log off, I will compile everything back together at the end.
Great. Yes, we will have the chat box, the chat saved. Someone asked if it's okay to answer in the chat box. Yes, absolutely. Please do answer in the chat box if you're not able to access the document. And I do see some people in the document.
Okay. Sorry for that feedback. That was 2 minutes, so if you could just finish your last thoughts and come on back to Zoom. If this was helpful for you, it's definitely a practice that I find helpful to engage sometimes. As people are coming back, I'm curious in the chat box, how was that for your energy to do that little reflection? Okay. So I see a lot of people, sorry about the feedback, Laura. I see a lot of people, it's about the students. That's great. So like I said, this may bring up some sadness for you. A lot of us are missing aspects of our work, but I also think taking a minute to remember what's the point of all this, particularly on the hard day, can be helpful for us. And sometimes we need reminders from others. So I will consolidate the comments in the chat box and the comments in the document into one document. I'll change the sharing settings so we can't add to it later. And I'll put it on that resource page. So you might go back to it at some other time if you need a boost. Okay, and we made a list. So what? Why is that helpful? I really love brains. And so I titled this as Extending Positives, but I really think about it as dopamine hacking. Dopamine is the chemical in your brain that goes off when you experience something rewarding. And there are some parts of our work, I think we all know, that are just naturally soaked in dopamine. For a lot of teachers, me included, graduation is one of those. Like, I hear pomp and circumstance and it doesn't matter who's graduating, I'm choked up immediately. And then there are some parts of our work that are less dopamine challenged. And that might be the day with like the difficult meeting and the paper jam, but it might be right now where you are teaching remotely if you're somebody who gets your energy off your students, and it's a little harder to get that energy through Zoom than in person. But one of the cool things about dopamine is we get it in the moment. We can also engineer it a little bit. So if you've had the experience of looking at vacation photos on a day when you're kind of down and you get a boost from that, that's what I think of as dopamine hacking. So we can kind of engineer those experiences. Many people know, like, oh, keep a photo of something that reminds you to be positive. And that's really helpful for some people. I will say visual reminders can become background wallpaper pretty quickly. So think about how to switch that up. I know on PCs, I have set my desktop background to cycle through a folder. So my desktop changes every 15 or so minutes. And so it's always fresh. And that helps your brain notice those reminders. I love using passwords as positive reminders. I don't know how many times you type your password every day, but mine feels like about 1,000,002. And so if it can be something positive, many people keep a positivity file. So a digital or a paper file when that student writes you the thank you note about how amazing this class was, that you put it somewhere where you can find it when you need a tough day. I love that idea. And then I got to tell you, I am terrible about ever actually looking at the file. It's one of those things I start off in September and I'm great about filing and then I forget about it. My personal hack for that is my email allows me to schedule emails into the future. So I have been scanning and emailing my future self reminders of kind of good things or notes from my students or something to help me connect back to the parts of this that feel meaningful. But I think it's not just about kind of thinking positive, but using what we know about what's positive to try to do what's called job crafting. So that study about the hospital maintenance workers, they found not just that some people thought about their work differently, but people tweaked their work to be more meaningful for themselves. And this is a thing that I find really helpful to think about now and in general. So I want to talk now. Our work for most of us has been totally reconfigured in ways we didn't ask for, in ways that we had very little time to plan for, and in ways that are really challenging for a lot of us. And if I think about what are the parts of my work that are super rewarding for me, I can think a little bit more strategically about, well, everything's all jumbled. What is most important for me to hang on to? So for everybody who was saying it's about the students, I might imagine prioritizing making student calls over spending 1,000,000 hours setting up your Google Classroom right now. On the other hand, if you're somebody who prioritizes and really gets a lot out of learning and accomplishment, setting goals about using new technology and then like having something you can check off. I love checking things off on my to-do list. Very little makes me happier than checking things off on my to-do list. So I might be thinking intentionally about how can I make this a learning experience and celebrate that progress as I go, even in this crazy land of COVID, social distancing, remote teaching, whatever we're doing. If you're somebody who really values your colleagues, I might be thinking, can we do some kind of collaborative project even now? Whatever it is, if you've identified what your positives are, thinking about, can I save those pieces in this craziness? And maybe I don't worry so much about some of the other pieces. In kind of more normal times, I think about this as kind of how can I shape my work? So some of us have a lot of flexibility in our work. Some of us have less flexibility in our work. But I would guess that pretty much all of our supervisors at some point come to us and say, okay, I need 3 professional development goals for the year. Or I need 2 professional, whatever it is. And most of the time, most of us make those goals about addressing our weaknesses. And that is great. We should totally be getting better at the things that are hard for us. And I'm going to encourage you Next time somebody asks you for those goals, make one of those goals at least something that will fill your soul. So you've got 2 goals about weakness, and you've got 1 goal where you say, all right, favorite colleague, you and I are going to design a lesson, a unit together, because I know that working with you will help me feel really engaged and positive. I, one year, decided I absolutely need to redesign all of my flyers for my volunteer recruitment, which was good for the program, but really was because I knew that learning enough graphic design to do that would be a really engaging thing for me, and so it would help me feel connected and energized at work. So we have different levels of flexibility, but I think being intentional about saying, let me do the pieces I love. One final bit of encouragement on that, often the things we love are the things we're best at. So if you can get more of those, you are likely making a really strong impact on your team and your students. And so I'm just going to share again, so encouragement for personal journaling. We're not going to do this as a group, but the question I would leave you to think with is thinking about your list of positives. How can you amplify a few of them now or in more normal times? And so that's both kind of what can you get some dopamine out of, but what can you engineer more in your life? So this is the link to the guided journal. This question is on page 4 if you want to sit with it. But I also want to pause for a minute and just check if there are any questions or comments before we move on to challenges.
If anyone has a question, please put that in the chat box. I see a lot of liking the positive vibes. People are enjoying the focus on positivity.
Okay, great. So everybody liking the focus on positivity, and we do need to talk about challenges. So managing challenges. Before I go on to managing challenges, words of wisdom from the ultimate source of wisdom, my mom, who spent my entire adolescence telling me to pick my battles. My graduate program told me to think about my spheres of influence. People who were involved in 12-step and recovery programs talk about the Serenity Prayer. All different sorts of ways of naming, paying attention to what challenges can we address and what is beyond our capacity, because some of us would really like to manage all the challenges, and there is a part of me that feels like if I can just make everything into a to-do list with checkboxes and organization and color coding and optimize it all, life would be great. And unfortunately, I can't do that for everything. So as we talk about managing challenges, doing it with some gentleness and awareness that some challenges we can really control, and some challenges what we have to control is how we respond, and not sort of the external circumstances. So a partial typology of those challenges, there are challenges that are big structural stuff. There are challenges that I think of as being about priorities or load, where there's just too many things on the plate. And then where I want to spend some time is thinking about specific stresses. I have this theory that if we can make something specific enough, we can do a lot better job of solving it. Each of these could be, at the very least, a workshop, but really like some books and some lifelong learning by themselves. So we're just going to touch briefly, particularly on the outer 2. That big structural stuff, long list, these are real, and that's mostly what I want to say. They're real and they weigh on us. And the fact that they stress us out, if you are stressed about the coronavirus, if you're worried about your students, if you're concerned about people in your circle, that means you're human and compassionate, and not that you are necessarily failing at self-care. Like, it's just, this is stuff and it's hard. So I just want to say briefly, taking action can be self-care. I know every time I get really upset about politics, I find a congressional candidate to donate $20 to, and that does help. But it's also sometimes important self-care to acknowledge our limits. I cannot single-handedly solve every single problem in the lives of every single student, and that is hard. And I wish I could. And it is some of the lifelong work to figure out how to collaborate with others and sit with our own limits on that. But I just want to acknowledge that stuff. I don't have great answers. I'd love to chat with people later if you want to follow up, but just acknowledging that stuff is real, and move us on to focus on things that are a little more within our control. So priorities, load, there's just too much on the plate. I think some of the most important self-care we do is having that difficult conversation with somebody and saying, wait, we need to prioritize. There are more things on this list than there are hours in the day. There are more things than there is energy in my life right now, which are really important to do and which can wait for later. And that's hard. I think it goes best when we frame it that way, as which are most important. So it's a productive conversation. I do think it gets easier the more often we have it. And I just want to give you some brief encouragement. If you are somebody like me who finds this really hard, having those conversations, it helps us. I think most of us know that. If I could talk to my boss or whoever it is that, you know, my partner, my family, whatever, about priorities, and I could get some things off my plate, that would lower my stress level. We know that for the most part, even though it's hard to do. What was learning for me was actually that it helps them as well, and it helps other people. So I always tell my students that they need to ask me questions because I'm not a mind reader. But it took me a long time in my life to realize, oh, my supervisors aren't mind readers either, or my partners or other people. If I don't say it, they don't know. And that's a problem for me, but it's a problem for them too. If our supervisors or whoever don't know that the load is too much, when they do know, then they've got information and ammunition to go and try to do something about it, to try to restructure things, to try to lobby for more resources, to try and redesign. But they need that information from us. It's also helpful for others. I had one of these conversations with a supervisor pretty early in the social distancing thing. And she's a super kind, compassionate person. And like everybody, our bandwidth was super tapped at that point. And I got done with this conversation with her and she said, thank you for telling me this. And I'm going to go call everybody else now, because if you're feeling it, probably others are too. And I think she would have gotten into checking in with people at some point, because she's that kind of caring person. But she got to it sooner because I said something. So this is just my little soapbox encouragement. Have that conversation. Again, if you want to talk more, I'd love to chat with people. Send me an email and we'll talk about it. But I want to spend more of our time on this getting specific thing. So when we struggle, can we identify the specific reasons for that struggle? So this is a recent line of this thinking in my brain. So I'm burnt from a long day. Well, why am I burnt? Because I had a whole bunch of meetings. Well, why was that hard? Because I kind of hate Zoom. This is true. And why is that? Because I feel subconscious on camera. That's kind of true. When I get down to those lower levels, I think things get more solvable than just I'm burnt from a long day. So a story. Allison failing at self-care. I am just somebody who's super susceptible to colds. I know this. This has been a thing for a long time. And so I know that really what I need to do is go take a nap and get some sleep and some rest and I'll be fine. But I had a season a couple years ago where like for the whole winter, just had a cold that wouldn't leave, couldn't get rid of it. And not just some sniffles, like I was taking Dayquil and carrying around the really good, super aloe, soft Kleenex with me every day. But I kept going to work and teaching sick, even though I knew I wasn't doing a good job, even though I knew I needed to sleep. And I'm guessing many teachers know the reason, because when you're sick, at least when I'm sick, the last thing I want to do is think about how to make a subplan. And so I didn't. I just showed up sick, and it was not good for anybody. But you know, eventually February break came, and I got some rest, and I recovered, and I started to think like, let's not do that again. What can I do? And getting specific and identifying the problem was the subplans meant that I could work on that. The next time I had a prep week, I made a couple of super generic subplans. I wrote the copier codes down in one place, and then I didn't have to worry about it. So this is like my favorite one, a great teacher tip. But more, that's a very specific thing. Subplans are a pain. I can solve that a little bit easier when I can take the time to kind of narrow down and identify what is it about this challenge that's really getting to me. This works in two ways. One, we can narrow the problem and make it more solvable. So subplans are more solvable than I'm really sick. Zoom makes me self-conscious is more solvable than I'm burnt from a long day. We can also start to think upstream. If I know that subplans are a problem, I can make the subplans ahead of time. If I know that Zoom is stressful, I can schedule my work so that I don't have Zoom sessions back to back, or I can take a walk before them. Or, and I did this, I put in a request that my staff meeting be camera optional so that I can just not be as stressed, have less challenge that I have to deal with down the line. Getting specific allows us to problem solve in different ways. It looks like time is clicking by. So I am going to just share this encouragement for personal journaling and not take the time to do it now, although that's a shame. So this is the same document as before. If you've already got it, you've got it. If you didn't get it before and you want it now, there's the link. I believe this is on page 6. But thinking about sort of a recent challenging time, like, I don't know, a global pandemic, and a complete rearranging of many of our routines, what are the specific stresses that you can identify? And can you gently, non-judgmentally, with curiosity, identify what is hard about that? It's hard because I'm in the house all the time. It's hard because I don't see people in person. It's hard because what? And then we can start to think about, okay, well, if being inside is stuff, can I take more walks? If it's about social contact, can I make more Zoom calls? If it's about the disruption to routines, my experience, can I build in some structures that would help me set new routines or that would remind me of my old routines? Narrowing it down so that we can start to problem solve. Okay. I'm not seeing the chat, so I just want to check, are there any sort of urgent comments or questions before we move on?
Allison, there's one question here about needing a password or permission to access the link. Do you know anything more about that?
That's surprising. So what I will say is that link is set up, if it's correct, it's set up so that you will get your own copy of a Google Doc. So it might be asking you to log into your Google account. If not, I'm not sure what's up. I will maybe make a PDF and put it on the resource page so people can get it that way if the link does not cooperate.
Okay, and if you can always send me the PDF and we can send that out to people as well.
I am making a note.
Okay, we'll check on the permissions. Thanks for the comments, everyone.
And sorry about that. Okay. So final element, maintaining energy. And this is really what I think most people think about when we talk about self-care. So I think about this is like basic care and feeding, food, rest, hydration, boundaries or balance, integration, however you talk about keeping the elements of your life in some kind of order where they don't totally overwhelm each other, and then kind of restoration, soothing, treats, bubble bath, yoga, whatever that is for you. And these are all kind of in the service, I hope, of refueling us, recharging us so that we can do our lives, which demand a lot of us. I will say, though, that most of us probably know, in broad terms at least, the what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to eat healthfully. We're supposed to move. We're supposed to maintain boundaries. We're supposed to maintain relationships. We're supposed to stay hydrated. We're supposed to do all the things. Most of us know what we're supposed to do, but actually figuring out how to implement it in our lives is it's a much harder challenge for many of us. And this, again, is back to kind of you do you. I put together a list of 50 strategies, and there are probably easily 50 more that we could come up with. These are not the necessarily 50 be-all and end-all strategies, but when I sat down, this is what came to my mind. So there's a link that Rachel could share, and I know I've got that one already PDF'd on the resource page if we have any more technical issues. I do want to say, as we are thinking about which tips are going to serve us, I want to give you a question to ask yourself, which is, will I feel better after? Or will I be glad I did this? Which is really different from, do I feel like doing this now? So when we're depleted, a lot of us want to like crash on the couch and consume your comfort food / beverage of choice and maybe scroll something on a screen mindlessly. And in the moment, that feels like all we have energy for. It feels like there is nothing left in the tank. And, you know, I'm just going to crash until I can recharge. And one of the things that is counterintuitive, but appears to be broadly true, again, you do you, is that for most of us, more active recovery or active recharge is more effective at giving us energy after than that kind of passive crashing. And so some caveats with that. When I say active, I don't necessarily mean you need to go for a 10-mile run. If you like running, absolutely. And in general, it's good for us to find some form of movement, but my preferred form of exercise is turning the pages of a library book. So I don't necessarily mean physically active. Could be, but not necessarily. It's about kind of intention. So you could still be crashed on the couch, but you're maybe reading a book and you're mentally engaged in the lives of the character or the world, or learning about the topic. It might be screen time, but it's that movie that you know always makes you laugh and you're emotionally engaged. It might be that you're crashed on the couch, but you're FaceTiming with somebody, and so you're getting that social connection. It could be that you're crashed on the couch, but you're creating and you get the satisfaction of knitting, or a lot of us are baking a lot right now because there's a way that engaging with the world helps refuel us. The thing that doesn't seem to refuel most of us most of the time is being kind of mindless. Sometimes we need to rest, but our brains seem to not recognize the difference between kind of scrolling Facebook or Instagram or whatever and working. It still feels like our brains are on in some way, and so we don't get a lot of recharge. If the thing is like, I'm really drained and I need rest, then we need rest. We need a nap. If we're introverts, we might need some solo time. We might really need to recharge, but we need to do it usually with some more intention than many of us really feel like doing in the particular moment. So will I feel better after this? That's my charge to you. Or at least it's the question that helps me kind of navigate this. Okay, so fingers crossed. I'm going to try this again. This time, what tips help you maintain your energy? Same procedure, Google Doc link, 2 minutes. I'm not going to turn on the waves because that's how we got the feedback. So I will just time it myself and kind of announce, hey, everybody, please come back. If you had technical difficulties and you just want to put it in the chat box, go ahead. I will compile everything together after. But thinking about what are the tips that help you maintain your energy, I do want to say, as we think about that, I want to define tips as sort of small, achievable action step. So for me to tell you, do active recharge is, I hope, helpful, but it might be more helpful if I told you, hey, you might want to think about 10 fun activities you could do and just have that list already made so that when you're drained, you don't have to come up with it. It's helpful to say take breaks. It's maybe more helpful to say set an alarm on your phone to remind you to take a break, or make a phone date with a friend so that you take your break and you really take your break. So just take a minute. What are the tips that help you in the doc or in the chat, whichever works for you, and then we'll come back together in a minute. Okay, timer. I'm seeing some great suggestions and I'm seeing some themes. A lot of people taking walks, breathing, and there's really strong science on this. If you breathe slowly and with intention, it physically helps your body get out of fight or flight and reduces your stress hormones. I see a bunch of dog walks and talking with people we care about, cooking, music, pets, sitting on my porch drinking tea. I would add a star to that one. I see people creating in different ways, mindfulness practices, naps, exercise, taking breaks, connecting with the kids. I love this from Marie, having a to-do list that includes fun and meaningful things that I enjoy. That is also one of my practices. Does this type of refueling create more dopamine? Yes, so that's what's happening is when we do something that is rewarding and engaging, then we can tap into that reward center in our brain. It might also be triggering other kinds of kind of neurochemical things. Motion helps reduce stress hormones, so does kind of breathing and mindfulness. Connecting with others releases a different set of hormones that are about social bonding. But basically all of these are about getting our, getting kind of the positive circuits in our brain and our body going. And that seems to be more beneficial to us than just stopping, even though we feel like stopping. So we are at 1:56. So if you are still brainstorming tips and you want to keep at it, go for it. But I'm just going to try to quickly move on so that we get to everything. So action planning. If we were in person, I'd love to sit and plan with everybody for how to put this into practice. But since we're not, I did put together a planning guide for you. You've got a link to a PDF. I'm guessing that you all have had the experience I have where you go to a thing and you think, I'm totally going to do that. And then like life happens and we don't always follow through on what we want to do. I do know a couple things that help. It is easier to follow through on something when we have a plan and when we write that down. So that's why I'm giving you the planning guide. And I would encourage you in doing that to think kind of broadly about any of these or all of these elements that sort of speak to you. It's also easier to do that when we do it in community. So 2 ways. One is to share one step that you'll take in the chat box now, and we can all take some inspiration from each other. And I think it's really cool to see however many teachers all taking steps for their self-care. So do that. Also, if you would benefit from a nudge or some follow-up, and this is broadly a thing that helps people stick to intentions, there's a link. I will send you an email in a couple weeks and say, hey, how's it going? And provide that nudge if it would be helpful to you. So if Rachel could drop that link in the chat box. You can also use that form if you want to send me a comment, you want to get on my mailing list, you want to ask me to send you something, whatever it is. If you want some follow-up from me, use that form, including a nudge for taking action, but not limited to that. And I think with that, I'm just going to say thanks, stay in touch, and I'll take any questions that or comments that people have that I didn't already get to see.
Great, thanks, Allison. And I'm going to just share a couple more pieces of information while people are putting any final questions into the chat box. That was such great information. I want to let people know we have one more webinar coming up in this series on blended and distance learning. That will be next Monday at 2 p.m. It's pretty full right now, but feel free to go ahead and register. And if you can't get in, then we'll be able to send you the slides. As I mentioned before, we'll have a survey that will go out to you at the end of this webinar. And if you need a certificate to show that you were here and participated, you'll just let us know that in the survey and we'll be able to send you that certificate. Here are some ways you can stay connected to us at MK. You can follow us on Twitter, you can like us on Facebook, you can sign up for our newsletters and action alerts, or join as a member. And my email is here as well if you need additional information or have other thoughts about what kinds of information we can be sharing with you during this time. We know that many of you have attended past network conferences with us. Every year, the conference brings together over 550 teachers, tutors, counselors, administrators, advocates, and students to strengthen the practice of adult education and to celebrate the passion and intelligence and perseverance of this community that's so vital to our future. Of course, we had to cancel this year's conference, and we are bringing some of the content to you via this webinar series, but we are hoping that we'll be back together in person next year. And if not, we will find a virtual way to hold our conference. So please save the date and plan to join us next year for Network 2021. So I want to thank all of you for being here with us today. Thank you for all of your patience with our technical challenges. Thank you for all your ideas and thoughts and commitment. Thank you, Allison, for this wonderful resources, and what a great guide to thinking about how to stay positive and take care of ourselves during this really difficult time.
Well, thank you for organizing this opportunity.
Absolutely. Just want to remind everyone that the slides and the recording will be available. We will email you the slides, and the recording will be available on the MK website in the coming weeks. So thank you all for being here with us today. We hope this is a good start to your week, and we will hope you'll stay in touch with us and be well, and we look forward to connecting with you all again soon.